Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. We're doing this one in reverse because we had a little bit of a connection issue. But Monica, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. I really appreciate the last conversation we had about Michael Jackson. I learned a lot, and I wanted to do this episode in particular to focus more on some of the allegation stuff that came out that a lot of my generation caught the tail end of or were kind of stuck in the middle of. Could you please reintroduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Yes, I'm Monika Wiesak, and I wrote the book Michael Jackson, the Man, the Music, the Controversy. And so the book is sort of like the subtitle says, about a third of it is about Michael, who he was as a person, as a human being, how others viewed him. A decent chunk is about his music. And then I'd say probably close to half the book is about the allegations themselves and really trying to explain those allegations to people and to essentially debunk them and to ensure that people really understand what happened to him from that perspective.
Before we get into the allegation stuff, I want to ask, who is Michael Jackson? I mean, from his career in music to his personal life. I feel like from our last discussion, if you learn more about his personal life and the things that he did do, you start seeing a lot of these allegations in a different light, more that they weren't true at all and there was no basis to them, despite what maybe the media was reporting.
I think I view him as a very like pure heart and a very pure soul. And that's what attracted me to him as a little kid. Because the first song I remember hearing was Man on the Mirror. And it had such an impact on me. Like I still remember sitting in the grass with my little white radio listening to it, and he was basically telling me to be a better person, to be a more empathetic person, to be a more compassionate person, to not forget about the people that are typically forgotten by society. And then soon after he came out with like Heal the World and Black or White. And so these songs for me as a child had massive impact on me. And I viewed him as a really unifying figure, because he was always very open to all cultures, all religions, all ethnicities. And he was loved globally, in South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, wherever it was, he was globally adored. His music was very universal. And that's kind of how I saw him as someone who was very universal, who could connect with anyone and who could really make the world a better place, make people more empathetic, make people more compassionate, make people more caring, more sympathetic to others. And I think that's who he was at his core is he wanted to use his music as a healing mechanism and as a unifying mechanism for society to really make the world a kinder and gentler place is what he was trying to do with his music.
Do you think he understood himself? What Michael Jackson wanted. I mean, when we talk about, it's kind of going to lead to a bigger question, which is, do you think people understood Michael Jackson? Because before we get into the allegations, there is a lot of like an adult hanging out with children has not ever been very comfortable. If it's your own kid, sure. But if it's a guy, that has a whole ranch that's really dedicated to, like I said, from our first discussion, learning about the fact that he was having people who were burn victims going there and people that were just trying to feel normal and want to enjoy and have a good time and really reclaim their innocence. Michael Jackson did that with Neverland Ranch, but a lot of people just see footage of a guy walking with kids and they start feeling a certain way, and those allegations rise up, and that's the first thing people think of.
Yeah, I think the first thing people don't know is what Neverland actually was. So people assume that it was a house that he lived at, that he was at 24/7. And he was at Neverland a bit at the latter parts of his life, like in the early 2000s. But when he purchased the ranch in the late 1980s to the late 1990s, he was only there 1 to 2 weeks of the entire year per year. So he was almost never there. And there was essentially a full-time charity operation, had like 100 staff. 1 to 3 times a week, they'd invite like a group of inner city children or a group of terminally ill children or a group of elderly people to enjoy the 3,000-acre ranch because it was right next to a national forest. So it was really scenic. It's got these gorgeous trees and lakes and rolling hills, and it does have a park there, an amusement park and a zoo. So it's a time for these kids or these elderly people to enjoy something that they would otherwise not get to enjoy and to really be themselves and feel at home and feel at peace. And that's really what Neverland was. So, but he did himself enjoy spending time with children, especially during this time of his life. So I think it was like twofold. Part of it was he didn't have a childhood. And so he was, I think, a little bit emotionally stunted. Like I know one of the music executives said, when he'd come into her office, he'd dump her contents of her purse onto the table. And she's like, I'd expect a 4 or 5 year old to do this, not this genius 18-year-old. And his relationship with Lisa Marie Presley, one of his studio engineers said it was like two seventh graders in love. So he was sort of at that seventh grade level in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And so that's when he was hanging out with people like Macaulay Culkin and Brett Barnes. And so that was part of it, is he was just emotionally, it was his first opportunity to try to develop real friendships instead of work around the clock. And so he gravitated towards people that were emotionally kind of at the same level he was, that sort of junior high level. Um, but at the same time, I think the reason he loved children and loved children all the way to the end of his life is he loved creation. He loved God. He was a very, very spiritual person. And so he had a massive, massive appreciation for nature, for children, for essentially creation, anything that God creates. He just had a massive appreciation for. And that's, I think, why he loved children so much, just like he loved nature so much. Because Neverland was essentially 3,000 acres of pure nature.
Plus, Michael Jackson kind of felt a little bit like he was didn't have a home or didn't have a place. You know, when you talk about just feeling normal or feeling accepted, I mean, adults are filled with judgment. Kids are not. You know, that's a big comfortability factor. And you got to think Michael Jackson's kind of stunted emotionally just because of his childhood being, forced into just performing all the time. I mean, the kid shouldn't play at a strip club. But, Michael Jackson did. He performed like his dad told him to, and he, worked hard to get to where he amounted in his career. But when you look at the amount of, I guess, interviews that are out there with him where he's acting kind of immaturish or just young, like a child, it's because the emotional stunt. And that's why you want to be surrounded by people that are in the kind of the same personality and where the same maturity level that you are. And kids were a perfect factor. I mean, a lot of people don't remember this, but Neverland Ranch had adults go there to go with their kids if they wanted to go. It wasn't like exclusively just kids, and even old retirement people. Elderly people got to visit there on weeks too.
Yeah, no, whenever these groups of children would come up, their entire families, including their parents, were invited. So it was a whole, these were family events that were there. But I think you made an excellent point also, is that he felt more natural around children, because when adult was around him, he had to worry about what the adult wanted from him. Did they want some business deal? Did they want, some access to fame? What is it that they really wanted? Why were they trying to befriend him? Whereas when a 10 or 12-year-old befriends you, or 8-year-old or whatever, they're befriending you because they just like spending time with you. So I think it was also easier for him to, I guess, trust younger people, because he knew that they didn't have necessarily the same agendas that adults did.
And it wasn't like, I mean, it's weird to me that we accept Disney as like this place where it's like, yeah, kids' innocence, free, this place that was created by this man, Walt Disney. And Michael Jackson did the kind of the same thing. He let parents come to Neverland. It's not like he excluded parents or adults from ever going there. They got to be there with their kids if they wanted to be there with their kids and explore the park for themselves. But I guess since there's so much footage of him walking with kids, and Walt Disney doesn't have a whole lot of that, it's more about the park as an institution. But I guess it's different because he was more hands-on in the sense that he was actually there wanting to have fun also. He was letting everyone enjoy not only a piece of his creation, but a piece of himself as well too. And he understand the importance of making sure that he can relate to these kids as well too, having this kind of childhood that he never really had.
Yeah, and I think for Walt Disney, it was a business, right? For Michael, it wasn't a business. It cost him a lot of money. It was more his creativity and his desire to, help others experience the things that he never got to experience, and to sort of de-stress in a way that he really would have liked to have de-stressed when he was a child. So for him, it really came from the heart, and it wasn't, and it wasn't advertised. It's not something that was advertised. The media would say, oh, he's got this ranch and he's got an amusement park there. What they didn't say is he wasn't actually there 99% of the time, that this was a full-time charity operation. There was 100 staff there. They would run these events, 1 to 3 times a week, that would give these children who otherwise could never afford to have these experiences, be able to have these experiences. And it's not just financially afford. Can't run around Disneyland without people pointing fingers at them or staring at them. But at Michael Jackson's ranch, you could go there no matter what you look like, no matter what state you were in, and have, like, experience childhood for that day.
Now, the interviews that came out, there's many different interviews that are quite interesting with Michael Jackson, where he's having a squirt gun fight. He's in a tree when an interviewer is trying to talk to him. Now, if you handle them probably from the time people might have saw them, you might be like, that's kind of like strange. But now looking back from a more like trying to analyze the fact that he had a robbed childhood, you understand it to a deeper level. But those interviews that came out, were they before the allegations started arising or after?
Both. I mean, he did interviews before and after the allegations. I do think a lot of times when he was interviewed, he was interviewed with agendas, especially that Bashir documentary that came out, that was a very obviously manipulatively edited documentary, and you can see that clearly. But yeah, he did a lot of interviews before and after.
What documentary are you talking about? I don't think I've seen it.
That's the one that led to the 2005 criminal case. So I can go into that now if you want,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
I don't know if you want to go in order of the allegations or
Well, what's the first allegation, first of all?
1993. So it began in 1993. So essentially there was a guy, so Michael's car ran out of gas and he ran into there's a place nearby called Rent-A-Wreck that he went to for help, which was run by a guy named David Schwartz, and he was married to a lady named June Chandler, and they had a child, Jordy Chandler, but Jordy Chandler was the child with her ex-husband Evan. And Evan was a really absent father. He didn't pay his child support. He owed his wife like 60 grand in child support or something. And he basically paid no attention to Jordy. And then Michael was so grateful for them, being there to help him, that he ended up befriending June and her daughter Lily and her son Jordy. And when Evan found out about that, he got really sort of interested, and suddenly he was like became the most interested parent in the world. And but Michael wasn't really that interested in Evan because Evan was a bit of a narcissist, and Evan just wanted stuff from Michael. Evan had written a screenplay, and Michael had gotten a 40 million like dollar film production deal from Sony. So Evan wanted to like half of that money, and he wanted, to write scripts for Sony. And but Michael wasn't really interested in working with Evan. He wasn't returning his phone calls. So Evan started to get really jealous. And so David Schwartz, who was separated from June by now, but he was her second husband, he decided to tape a phone call with Evan because Evan was behaving really erratically. And in that phone call, he's like, I'm going to destroy Michael. I'm going to destroy June and Jordy. I'm angry at all three of them. They're like, not paying attention to me. Why doesn't Michael return my phone calls? He basically sounds like he's jealous that Michael's not paying attention to him, but is paying attention to June and Jordy and Lily instead. So he's kind of out of the picture and he doesn't like it, even though he's been out of the picture the whole time. Before Michael was there, he wasn't in the picture either. And so he basically says everything's going according to a certain plan that isn't just mine. I've got, people are lined up in certain positions, and all I have to do is pull the trigger, and this man will not sell another record. So it's very clear here that Evan's not doing this on his own, that there's other people involved, that they want to put these allegations out there. Now, I have no idea who else was involved. I have no idea who Evan was working with besides his lawyer, Barry Rothman. But essentially what happened then is June gave that recording because David Schwartz recorded the phone conversation, and he gave it to June, who then gave it to Michael's private investigator, Anthony Pellicano. And then Pellicano knew right away this was an extortion attempt. And he went to Jordy and said, is Michael molesting you? And Jordy said, no, my dad just wants money. And so a little bit later, Evan asked for 1 week custody of Jordy. He wanted to spend a week with his son. So June obliged. And then what Evan did is he went to a psychologist himself with a hypothetical and said, how do I report child abuse without liability to the parent? So basically, how do I report something that could potentially be false that I don't want to get in trouble for? And the psychologist said, well, if you have Jordy come to me, then I'm obligated to go to the Department of Children and Family Services and report it. And so after the week was over, Evan wouldn't give Jordy back to June. And eventually a whole month passed and he still wouldn't give Jordy back to June. So June went to court and said, I want my son back. And that basically the next day, Evan then took Jordy to that same psychologist that he went to with the hypothetical. And at that point, Jordy disclosed that he was molested. And just to take a step back, during that entire month, Evan is trying to negotiate with Pellicano and Michael's lawyers and asking for a film deal. So he wants to be able to write scripts for Michael's film production company. And he's basically saying, if you give me a script deal, I won't cause any problems for you. And Michael's lawyers are basically like, F off. We're not giving you a film deal. This is just not going to happen. And so I think he was trying to use these allegations as leverage basically to get money from Michael. But that didn't work out. And so they ended up going public with the allegations. And then what happened is that what the police then got involved, right? When the psychologist reported the allegations, the police got involved. But the thing that Evan did is he filed a civil lawsuit at the same time that the police were involved, which that created two cases simultaneously, a criminal and a civil. But one had absolutely nothing to do with the other, right? Because they're two totally separate cases, two totally separate court systems. And Michael's lawyers are like, what are you like, what the F? They're like, you can't pursue a civil case in the middle of a criminal investigation. You have to let the criminal investigation finish. You have to let the police finish their job. And then if you want, you can pursue a civil case. And the reason that they were really upset is with the civil case, they were trying to get Michael under oath in a civil deposition where he would have to say under oath, I was in this town at this place, I was at this location at that time. And basically, then the police could then craft their criminal case around what he's already been forced to say under oath. Because then you can kind of reverse engineer the charges. If you know everywhere that Michael was over the last 3 months, then you can say, okay, well, he then molested Jordy at such and such a time and place. And that's kind of what happened later, and I'll get into 2005, is when police found out Michael had an ironclad alibi, they just changed the dates on their charges. So that's what they're trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid forcing him to testify under oath in a civil case. So Michael's lawyers went to the judge 4 separate times and said, you have to delay the civil trial and let the criminal case go first. But Chandler's lawyer was like, they basically filed a motion for an expedited civil trial within 120 days. And they said, we want this trial ASAP because Jordy's going to lose his memory. Forget the criminal case. We want the civil case ASAP. So you have to look right there. Okay, who's pushing for the criminal? Michael and his lawyers. Who's pushing for the civil? Chandler and his lawyers, right? And so the police, while they're doing their investigation, they couldn't find any evidence. They couldn't find any corroborating witness, any physical evidence, nothing. So they ordered a body search of Michael, where they wanted basically him to strip and do photographs of him naked and whatnot, which is really humiliating. And the reason they did that is they wanted to see if the description matched Jordy's description, but it didn't, because Jordy said Michael was circumcised, but Michael was not circumcised. And there's other reasons we know the description didn't match. Number one, they didn't arrest him, so they would have arrested him if there was a match. But then Chandler's lawyers asked that the photographs be barred from the civil trial. So there's just absolutely no reason to ask that they be barred if there was a match. And then furthermore, the grand jury, they asked Michael's mother if her son had surgery on his private parts, so they wouldn't need to ask that question if there had been a match.
Why is there so many court shenanigans going on right now? It's not making sense. Like, it feels like after the first time that there was something that didn't add up to the story, they would just cancel it right there and be like, this does not seem like it's going anywhere.
Yeah, so I think the district attorney, and Michael wrote in his song, he wrote a song after that. He said, they want to get my ass dead or alive. He really tried to take me down by surprise. I bet he missioned with the CIA. So Michael thinks this is much bigger, that there's that these people are trying to destroy him. It's very clear that he thinks that people are trying to destroy him. And it's very clear. I don't know who the district attorney was working with. I don't know if he was working with the CIA or not. That's just Michael's song. It's his lyrics. So I don't know if he had any evidence or anything, but there's no doubt that that district attorney was going after him hardcore and was essentially ignoring every piece of evidence. And there's no doubt that Chandler and his lawyers were pushing the civil case like crazy because they knew they didn't have a case. They knew they didn't have a criminal case. So they were trying to push the civil because they knew they could get a settlement in the civil, because Michael's lawyers did not want Michael to give a civil deposition because that would then hurt his criminal case, because that's like giving away it's like giving the prosecution a front row seat to your defense and then letting them craft their case around it.
Well, do you think he would go to the criminal case if they settled in the civil? It seems like if he's going for money, or if he's going for maybe not Michael Jackson's just career in general, like not trying to take down Michael Jackson, maybe there's a part of that, but if he's originally trying to use Michael Jackson like a leech, and try and suck on some of the things that he's really working towards and really has going for him, you get a benefit to it. I feel like settling in a civil course, then you would just drop the criminal stuff and then it would all go away in the end. But then you would have this payout that would just sting your career for the rest of your life.
Yeah, so the criminal did not go away, so that's a misperception. So they settled so Michael was supposed to be deposed on January 25th. On the morning of his deposition, his lawyers settled the civil case because they did not want their client to give a civil deposition within an ongoing criminal investigation. And it's not clear who paid the settlement. I believe Michael's insurance company paid it. A representative from Transamerica claimed to the media that Transamerica offered to pay the settlement. So I believe they paid it. I'm not 100% sure. But then, and that later that spring, there were still two criminal grand juries that looked at the case, one in Santa Barbara and one in Los Angeles. And you know how they say a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich? Well, both grand juries refused to indict Michael Jackson because there was no evidence. And this is after the civil trial. Now, it's true that Chandler wasn't that interested in the criminal right from the get-go. It's obvious he has no interest in the criminal. His only interest is in the civil and in trying to basically push Michael for a settlement and using the criminal case as leverage for that. Because basically Michael doesn't want to do a civil, or his lawyers don't want him to do a civil deposition because they think that will basically give the police an unfair advantage in the criminal case. And that's what that whole settlement was about, was avoiding that civil deposition. But the police continued their investigation and they still convened two grand juries, but both refused to indict Michael Jackson.
So with the, I guess, criminal charges being paid out, what we think is the insurance people, I mean, did that damage the reputation? Because you can have that publicized that it was kind of paid off in a sense. Just whether it was like the insurance factor.
Yeah, no, it greatly damaged his reputation. And what you just said there is actually inaccurate. So they didn't pay off the criminal charges. There's two separate court systems, two separate court cases. Like the civil and criminal are completely unrelated from a court perspective. So they settled the civil case. And the reason is they don't want the police to use the civil case to basically have Michael go first and offer his defense. Because normally the prosecution goes first and then the defense, right? But they tried to undo it in this case and say, no, Michael, you go first, you go under oath, you give everything you know, and then we'll do our part, our prosecution after
Then they
that.
make a rebuttal to everything that he just defended himself with.
Yeah, so as a direct result of the Michael Jackson case in 1993, they changed the California law. So now going forward, because they realized how insanely unfair it was, so that now going forward, if you have a civil and a criminal case on the same matter at the same time, the civil case can be stayed or basically suspended, which is what Michael's lawyers were trying to do at the time, until the criminal case is complete. So basically forces the criminal case to go first. And that was a direct result of the Michael Jackson case and how insanely unfair it was to his right to defend himself, to force him to go first. The prosecution should always go first. The defendant should not be forced to go first.
Now, were any of these, I guess, hearings or any of these things that were going on being publicized that people could follow along as well too, or are they strictly getting their information from media sources like newspapers and things of that sort?
Yes. So 1993, this was really before the internet was widespread. So your only sources of information were really the mainstream press, which was at the time incredibly biased. The mainstream press was more or less these allegations are true, or they insinuated that they were true. They gave a lot of credibility to those allegations. They never really explained or did a good job of explaining the difference between a civil and a criminal, and they never explained that Michael's lawyers were pushing for the criminal and Chandler's for the civil. So they didn't really explain to the public what was going on. It was more like somebody's made an allegation, Michael Jackson's paid the allegation, hence he's guilty. That was really all that was in the press. And to this day, that's all people understand. They're like, well, didn't he pay some kid in 1993? That's what everybody responds because that's all they hear. But that's not at all what went down, right? There were two court cases. Michael's lawyers wanted the criminal case, which means he certainly did not pay to avoid prison, right? Because he was pushing for the criminal to go first. Yeah, so it's not 100% clear who paid the settlement. I believe the insurance company paid it. A representative from Transamerica, told the media that Transamerica offered to make the payment. And I know the legal secretary for Rothman, Chandler's lawyer, indicated that the insurance company made the payment. So there is indications that Transamerica likely made the payment, but I don't think we have like documented proof of that.
Now, what was the final verdict or the final outcome when this was all over with?
So there were two grand juries in the spring of 1994, and both grand juries refused to indict Michael Jackson because there was no evidence to support the claims, and that was basically the end result.
And media was kind of reporting it as that Michael Jackson basically paid to stay out of jail or something like that, or did okay.
Correct. Yeah. So
Okay.
they didn't really give the history or explain the whole, what I tried to just explain there.
Now, were there documentary pieces or other things that really tried to hammer down that there was this factor of rich influence? Because you got to think of the times back then. That's what everybody's thinking. Oh, he paid his way to get out of jail because most of Hollywood, music industry, all these famous people have had a long history of either getting out of jail for some act they did commit, all because either their celebrity personality or their money. And I think Michael Jackson's case or scenario, that rumor kind of got chalked into this whole mess of just, oh, he's famous. Celebrities can do what they want.
Yeah, no, that's basically exactly how the media reported it, and a lot of the public interpreted that way because they're like, "Oh, there was a big payment, a $20 million payment. He must be guilty." But they don't understand the history of what led to that payment, what was going on, who wanted the criminal case, who wanted the civil case. They're not understanding any of that history. They're like, "Oh, there was a $20 million payment, and that must equal guilt," without actually looking into it.
Do you think that was the best option for that $20 million payment, or do you think that if this would have actually been something that would have been live proceeding like the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard thing, everyone was able to follow along with that and watch it? If we had that type of resource when this was happening with Michael Jackson, would we have a whole completely different outcome when it comes to Michael Jackson and the, I guess, remembered sort of the public perception of what was really going on with those scandals?
I think from a legal perspective, he absolutely got the right advice. And I think any half decent lawyer would have given him that same advice because the criminal is much more important than the civil. You can't give your defense away before the police have even done their prosecution. Like any lawyer under the sun would have given Michael the same advice. Now, in terms of the financial, most likely it wasn't even Michael that paid it. But even if he did, you have to look at what's called lost income, right? The $20 million is a lot cheaper than not working for 6 months, where Michael can make a hell of a lot more than $20 million. So it's like being told, like imagine you're in Michael's position, right? You're not famous, but somebody is suing you for something, and the police is criminally investigating you for the same thing, and your lawyer is telling you that you need to let the criminal go first. You need to let the prosecution go first. You cannot tell the whole world under oath where you were when you were there, and then the police can just say, "Oh, he didn't do it at that time. He did it at that time," because we know everything, everywhere he's been, everything he's done. And so, and then they told you, well, you cannot work for 6 months and have no income for 6 months and go through the civil trial, or you can pay your equivalent or whatever, $20 or $100, and the civil will go away. You'll preserve your right to give your defense for the first time in a criminal courtroom, and you won't have to lose 6 months of work. Which option would you take? So the lawyers absolutely gave him the right advice. Now, the problem is with Michael is you have the media and the public image. So from a media and public image perspective, it was absolutely the wrong way to go, right? Because now you can claim, oh, he paid his way out of prison. Even though that's false, you can give that perception to the public. So from a media image perspective, it was 100% the wrong way to go. But you have to think about it from the perspective of he's being targeted, right? They're really pushing the civil case. The police are going like crazy on a case that really has no evidence. So it's very clear that every decision is going against Michael. Like the judge denied 4 times his request that the criminal go first. So he sees the judge is not on his side. He sees the police is not on his side. He's got these civil, attorneys going after him. So he's really being targeted from every perspective. So even if he had gone through the civil, there's no saying what they would have done to get what they wanted. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you just have to get away from this bad situation. And so I think he legally he absolutely did the right thing. From an image perspective, it was not good, but I'm not convinced how much better it would have been had he not done it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because if you're trying to destroy someone, you're gonna keep trying to destroy them. Like it's not, you know what I mean? There's no way to avoid that. If the press wants to write bad stories about you, they're gonna write bad stories about you. They'll find something else to write bad stories about you.
Well, you mentioned loss of income, but how much did it affect his overall performance, and his overall career afterwards when it came to not publicity, but I'm just talking about his time on stage, his compassion with his fans, and then how did it affect him personally? I mean, I see it very hard to want to go back to Neverland or let people stay at Neverland, even if you're helping out through a charity thing, when you've had this horrible accusation come out of it. You start wondering, well, when's the next one? When's it going to happen again to me? You know, how am I going to be able? That's a hard thing to be labeled something like that when you didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, I think Michael was very stubborn. And I think maybe because partly because when he was a kid, everyone told him what to do constantly. So when he was an adult, he was like, no one's going to tell me what to do. And so he didn't change the way he lived. Like he continued to run, Neverland as a charity operation. He didn't stop that. Like he wasn't going to allow anyone to sort of tell him, no, you can't do this or you can't do that or you can't help people or, he didn't want to be controlled. Maybe because he was controlled as a kid. I don't know if that's why when he was an adult, he was just not controllable in any way, shape, or form. He was very stubborn, very independent. And so he wasn't going to change because of society's perceptions. That just wasn't who he was. But it did hurt him in the long run, I think, from a financial perspective, because he came out with the History album, which was an amazing album, which sold a lot. He did the History tour, which made massive amounts of money. Um, so he still made massive amounts of money in the mid 1990s. But I think by the late 1990s, early 2000s, his image was quite a mess. And so definitely his income went down as a result of that. So I think that is a fair argument you made that, maybe in the short run, settling was financially more beneficial, but in the long run, it probably was less beneficial.
How long until the next allegation came out? And then what was the next allegation? Who was it?
Okay, so in 2003, there was a documentary. So Michael's image was a mess kind of in the late 1990s, early 2000s, like I said. And it wasn't just because of these allegations. It was like plastic surgery. It was painkillers from genuine physical ailments, but nevertheless, there was
Again,
some
he
pain.
was set on fire on stage. I mean, I think once people know that, you're like, all right, man, I get the skin change. I understand
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So there was some painkillers. So his image was basically a bit of a mess. And so he wanted to repair his image. So he agreed to do this documentary. And the documentary he ended up being manipulated into participating into a hit piece, which is not what he expected at all, right? He expected this to be a positive documentary. And the guy just completely twisted it and, took things out of context and put like, sinister music over it and innuendo. And you know how easy it is to create these
They
crappy
TMZ'd it.
documentaries. Yeah, they TMZ'd it basically. And so it just this awful documentary came out. And in the documentary, he was this boy Gavin Arvizo and his family were visiting Michael. So Gavin had met Michael through Michael's hairstylist because his son was in the same dance class as Michael's hairstylist's son. And they begged Michael's hairstylist to let them meet Michael because Gavin had a rare form of cancer. He survived, he's still alive now. And so she agreed to take them to Neverland to meet Michael. And so Michael ended up, and they stayed like, went to Neverland a few times. And Michael from the get-go was not that crazy about this family because they testified in court that Michael would tell them he's not at Neverland, but they would see him at Neverland. So they knew he was avoiding them. So I think he kind of got a spidey sense from this family from the get-go. But in any case, this kid appeared in this documentary with Michael. And Bashir, who was filming the documentary, he asked Michael to hold Gavin's hand at one point.
Wait, I'm sorry. You said that he was at Neverland and or he would lie and say he wasn't at Neverland, but he was at Neverland. Was
Correct,
he actually
Michael.
there? Well,
Yeah, he was
sometimes you don't
there.
want to wait for a line on your own damn train. You just want to ride it sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, because I think he just didn't want to hang out with our Viso kids because they were kind of sketchy kids. But Michael had a good heart. This kid had
Starting
cancer, and so
fires and shit. I got you. Yeah.
So I think Michael felt bad for them, so he didn't want to like kick them off the property, but he didn't want to hang out with them, so he would tell them he's not there. But the Gavin testified, he's like, "Well, I saw Michael in the library, but he told us he wasn't at Neverland." And so anyway, so Michael, like his spidey sense or whatever was kind of already up about this
I
family.
mean, that's a red flag if you think of a red flag.
Yeah. So, but in any case, so Gavin appeared in this documentary and he was holding Michael's hand because Bashir had asked Michael to hold his hand, and Michael was like, "This is kind of weird, but whatever." He did what the film or director asked him to do. And so then, and in the documentary, Gavin told this story about, we one night we asked Michael if we could stay in his bedroom, and he said, "Sure, fine." And he said, "Why don't you can sleep in the bed?" And then Michael and his assistant Frank and Michael's kids slept on the floor, and Gavin and his brother slept in Michael's bed. But in the documentary, Michael's like, "You sleep in the bed," and Gavin's like, "No, you sleep in the bed." And so basically, Michael's like, "Well, you want to give the best to the company, right?" Um, and that's what you want to do. That's as a good host, that's what you want to do. And he didn't really want them in his room, but he didn't really have the heart to tell them no. And that's why he had Frank, his assistant, sleep in the room with him, because he's like, these kids are being kind of strange. But again, the kid has cancer. Michael doesn't have the heart. Michael's kind of very, I think, easy to take advantage of because he's a big heart. So he didn't want to like tell them no. So he's like, "Fine, you can sleep in the room." And he slept on the floor with his kids and his assistant. But the media chopped up the interview and basically, because in the interview, the interviewer asked Michael, "Is it okay to share your bed with someone?" And Michael said, "Yeah, there's nothing wrong with sharing your bed with someone or giving your bed to someone." And so the media chopped it up and they started, speculating 24/7 that Michael's molesting this child and Michael's sharing a bed with this child, even though if you watch the interview, it's clear they didn't sleep in the same bed at the same time. So the police started an investigation, and the Department of Family Services started investigating Michael, and the media is like going like crazy. So Gavin's family calls Michael. So this was filmed in like late 2002, but it aired in early February 2003. So the Arvizos hadn't seen Michael since it filmed in September 2002, but they called Michael and said, "The press is hounding us. They're at our door. They won't leave us alone. Can we come stay at Neverland for a few weeks until the media hoopla dies down, just so we have some, peace and space?" And Michael's like, "Yeah, that's fine. You can stay at Neverland for a few weeks." Because again, it's 3,000 acres. There's multiple guest cottages. So you can stay at one of the guest cottages. So that happened. And then when the Arvizos were at Neverland, Michael's staff testified that they acted entitled, that they were rude. And eventually by early March, Michael essentially kicked them off the property because, the staff were getting sick of the Arvizos and didn't really want them there anymore. So after that, the Arvizos went to the same civil attorney as in 1993, the same one that Chandler had used, and said, "We want to sue Michael for child molestation." But because the California laws had changed, the attorney said, "You can't sue them because the police are already investigating him criminally for molesting you," because the police started their criminal investigation as soon as this documentary came out. So they couldn't go the civil route. So they were forced to go the criminal route because of this change in the law. And so essentially by the following November 2003, the police arrested Michael Jackson. And here's what's really important. They charged him with molesting Gavin, according to Gavin, 5 times, and according to his brother, an additional 2 times. So a total of 7 times. So Gavin claimed he was molested by Michael 5 times. And get this, that this happened in February after the Bashir documentary aired. So after the press was hounding them and they went to Neverland, that's the first time Michael started molesting Gavin. So you have to look at this picture. Like the whole world is speculating you're molesting this kid. The police is investigating you for molesting this kid. The Children of Family Services is investigating you for molesting this kid. And you decide, "Hey, I'm going to, for the first time, start molesting this kid." You literally have to be the dumbest criminal known to mankind to do that, right?
So the only evidence that they're using to support some of the allegations is the fact that there's this chopped up documentary that everyone's speculating that Michael Jackson molested a kid.
Yes, basically. That's their evidence, right? And this family's making these claims, right? And the kid and his brother and his mother and whatever, and he has sister too, I think. So what happened then is he claimed he was molested 5 times between the dates of like February 7th and March 10th or something. So when they went to stay at Neverland after this documentary aired. But the police then ran into several problems. The first problem they found out is Michael actually filmed a rebuttal documentary to try to like deal with, the bad press from this hit piece. And Arvizo's taped for that rebuttal documentary on February 20th while they were at Neverland. And in that videotape that the police found, and you can find the videotape online, they're basically praising Michael, and there's tons of in between chit chat, right? So they're not just filming an interview for the rebuttal. There's like constantly stopping the film and they're chit chatting and whatever. And you can see that they think the Bashir allegations are, ridiculous, and they don't agree with his insinuations, and they praise Michael. So the police are like, crap, what are we going to do with this? This kid's saying he's being molested in early February, but we find this video on February 20th where he's, making fun of the insinuations Bashir is making and is clearly not being molested. So then what they did is they added a kidnapping charge, a kidnapping and imprisonment charge to Michael's list of charges. So they claimed that Michael kidnapped the Arvizo family and forced them to make this videotape praising him. Even though if you watch the videotape, there's clearly tons of chit chat in between official filming. So it's clearly not scripted, right? But they had to do something with this. So they added a kidnapping charge to Michael's list of charges. So he wasn't just charged with molestation, he was charged with trying to imprison a family or imprisoning a family. But then they ran into another problem because they found an ironclad alibi for the early parts of February. So they're like, well, crap, we can't say he started molesting him on February 7th. So then when they went to court, they said the molestation started after February 20th, after this video. So now you got the timeline where like this documentary comes out. Everybody starts speculating you're molesting this kid. The police start investigating you. The Department of Children and Family Services start investigating you. You kidnapped this family allegedly. You forced them to make a video praising you. And then you start molesting the kid for the very first time after all of that. Like that's the timeline they went to court with. And even one of the jurors like said, the court case was so ridiculous at times that she just wanted to burst out laughing. Like it's just the whole thing made no sense. So remember how I said they indicted him on 5 molestations? Well, when they got to court, that changed to 2. So in court, Gavin claimed he was only molested twice instead of 5 times like he originally claimed. And the jury foreman was like, who doesn't know the difference between being molested 5 times and 2 times? And the reason I think they changed it is because of the ironclad alibi, and they had to push out the dates. So the molestation now started in late February instead of early February. So now it happened only twice instead of 5 times. So you've got like constantly changing timelines, constantly changing charges. Like everything is like changing, like between when they indicted him and when they're actually at trial. And then this doesn't even get into the credibility issues of the Arvizos. So the Arvizos were basically scam artists. Like they had gone after Kobe Bryant, after George Lopez, after Jay Leno. They Gavin left his wallet at George Lopez's home, his wallet that had no money on it. And then his father came back the next day and said, "Oh, my son left his wallet here." And then he said to George Lopez, "What happened to the $300 that were in the wallet?" And Lopez is like, "I didn't even see this wallet. I didn't touch this wallet. I didn't take any money out of it." So they basically accused, an actor of like stealing $300 from Gavin's wallet. And Lopez called, Gavin's father an extortionist to his face. The Arvizos had previously sued J.C. Penney for sexual abuse. So essentially, in what happened is Gavin got picked up for shoplifting, and then his mother sued J.C. Penney saying the guards had sexually abused her. And then J.C. Penney ended up giving the Arvizo family $150,000 to go away because they don't want to deal with the Arvizo. So they like just, take this money and go away. So I think that's what they were hoping with Michael, because it worked for them with J.C. Penney. I think they were hoping that Michael would, and which is why they went to a civil attorney first, that they were hoping Michael would be like, just take some money and please just go away and
They
leave me
saw him as a
alone.
big celebrity, a cash cow, and they thought they could check out on, a scandal or something. He's so rich he would just pay it off. But I don't think people understand Michael Jackson when you really examine his personal life and you really examine like the interviews that he's in. I don't think he understood his own celebrity. I mean, he knew he was famous, but there are so many things that he's walking into where I'm like, this is just a person that thinks of himself as a person, not thinking of himself as some massive celebrity that's got to think of like, oh, this person could be trying to get money out of me. It's like if you see somebody broken down on the side of the road, a lot of people go, this person might try and kill me. But then there's the people that are like, no, I'm going to help out this person, even if they're wearing like a giant jacket and, hood up, and then they have a chained wallet or something like that and a crowbar. Like, yeah, they don't care.
Yeah, no, I think that's what Michael was like. And like I said, I think he had a bad sense about their visas from the beginning. There's a lot of evidence of that. But I think he had such a big heart that he just, and this kid had cancer, that he just didn't have it in his heart not
Did he
to.
have cancer? That's the
He
question.
did, he did.
Okay. All right.
I don't
I
think
didn't
it's as
know.
bad as they
Some
maybe
people make it up, some people make that up.
he definitely had cancer. So, I think Michael just felt really bad for a kid with cancer. And like, even though he kind of knew this family was sketchy, he had just such a big heart that he didn't have it in him to like not
Yeah.
help someone who needed help, but it got him into a really bad situation. So
Well,
that's
how do you,
oh, go ahead.
about to say, how do you say no to someone that has cancer and they want to go hang out with Michael Jackson or just hang out with you? Even if you're a celebrity, you're kind of like that. It doesn't seem, even if you are kind of hurt and burned from a allegation that happened years before, you're still like, I still want to, keep the good graces as well too. But either way, if you're looking from like a PR standpoint, you're kind of like in a really tough situation, a rock and a hard place, because you have to, if you, the documentary, for instance, I mean, did that get scrutiny in court? Did they were able to examine that and be like, there was things that were chopped up? Did anybody admit to chopping it up or doing that come out later?
Yeah, they actually showed the whole documentary in court, and they showed their whole rebuttal and all all the filming that was like the unedited filming that was done in court. So that did appear in court. And actually Bashir, the filmmaker, was a witness, and he refused to answer any questions. He pled the fifth on like every question. He was a useless witness. Well, he was useful in the sense that, he proved to be useless, so that, it showed that he wasn't, well, if he wasn't willing to answer any questions, he had something to hide. um
So when was that final decision made and what was the final verdict?
June 13th, 2005. So was charged with 14 crimes, again, from molestation to kidnapping to imprisonment. Even they accused him of giving alcohol, and he was acquitted on all 14 charges. So the verdict actually took almost 5 minutes to read, because they had to read every charge and then read not guilty after that charge, which I imagine was an excruciatingly long 5 minutes for Michael Jackson, because it's not just not guilty. You have to hear it over and over and over 14 times. So he was acquitted on all 14 charges, rightfully so acquitted. And and that was basically the end of that case. And that was the last accusation during his life. So those are the only two accusations he had while he was alive. And then there was that slanderous HBO documentary that came out a few years ago about these two other men who claimed that Michael molested them when they were kids. And we can go into that if you want, but those are basically the additional two documentaries, two allegations made after his death.
I do want to go into that because how many is it's just one bodyguard that talked about Michael Jackson doing some interesting or sex like kind of scandalous things, right? And that guy was only there for like I think it was only like one trip or something like that. He was a bodyguard for a very short amount of time. But if you look at the people that have actually known Michael Jackson throughout like most of his career, they have a different take and they don't believe any of those allegations. But it seemed like the one they used on that HBO documentary was one guy that had been his bodyguard for less than a couple of months or something like that.
Yeah, so that documentary, it was basically about two men. So just to kind of give some background. So the main guy making the accusation was a guy named Wade Robson. And he met Michael in the 1980s. He won a dance competition. That's how he met Michael. And he performed in some of Michael's music videos when he was young. When the 93 allegations came out, he testified under oath that Michael never did anything to him and that his relationship with Michael was good. And he actually testified at the 2005 criminal trial as a defense witness and claimed again under oath that Michael never did anything to him. He never molested him. When Michael died, Wade sent out all these emails saying he wanted to participate in like all these tributes to Michael, and he did. He participated like in the MTV tribute. He emailed So You Think You Can Dance and said, I want to do a tribute show to Michael. He wrote all these things praising Michael. So he kind of, in a way, capitalized on Michael's death, you could claim, but he did it in a way that was very positive. So he was praising Michael to no end, and he was doing all these tributes to him, but I think it was helping his career because he was a choreographer. He used to do choreography for Britney Spears and NSYNC. But by 2009, his career had dried up a bit. Like he wasn't as successful. And I think he was having trouble finding work. And so he kind of got a lot of attention by, praising Michael because of his connection to Michael, performing in his videos earlier in life and stuff. But then after that sort of, after his death, eventually things kind of died down. And Wade, I think it appeared he was struggling for money because he was like selling off memorabilia and all this stuff. And so he went and he tried to become the director of the Michael Jackson Cirque du Soleil show. So there's a Cirque du Soleil show in Vegas, and that also kind of traveled around the world that does a tribute to Michael with his music. So Wade sent an email to Cirque and said, I badly want to direct this show. I really want to be the director of this show. He told the press on camera that he had been hired as the director of the Michael Jackson Cirque du Soleil tribute show. So you can see he's still trying to do tributes to Michael, still trying to make money this way. But the Michael Jackson estate did not hire him. They hired someone else. And then shortly after, Wade started making allegations that Michael had abused him. So he basically did a complete 180 and went from praising Michael to making allegations of abuse. But I would argue that his behavior was quite consistent when you look at it through the lens of an opportunist, right? An opportunist tries to take advantage of situations, either in positive or negative ways. So when the positive ways had dried up, now was an opportunity to take advantage of his connection to Michael in a negative way. So he sued the Michael Jackson estate and Michael's companies for child molestation. Now, the going after the estate, that got dismissed because he claimed he didn't you can only file a claim against the estate if within like 30 days or something of you knowing the estate existed. And he claimed that he didn't know the estate existed, and the judge said no reasonable person could believe his claim because he interviewed with the estate for a job. So he obviously knew the estate existed because he wanted the Cirque du Soleil job. So that got tossed out of court. His other case is still in the courts right now. And so Wade, when he made his allegations, when he filed his lawsuit, it was the same week the Cirque du Soleil show premiered. So you have to wonder, is he making these allegations because he's mad because the Cirque du Soleil show didn't hire him, right? Because now he's basically suing the people that didn't hire him,
Yeah.
the job he quote unquote badly wanted, or he claimed he badly wanted. So this other guy, James Safechuck, this is where he comes into the picture. So about a week before Robson went on TV, his family business was sued for like 800 grand or something. And then he saw Wade on TV, and he then joined and filed another civil lawsuit against Michael for child abuse. Now, the important thing to note is that there's a statute of limitations in California. So they both had to claim that they didn't know they were abused until recently. So that they went through their whole lives not knowing they were abused, because they both testified under oath earlier that Michael had never abused them. And so they realized that, like James Safecheck said, when he saw Wade on TV, that's when he realized he had been abused by Michael Jackson as well. So you have to ask, is that when he realized he'd been abused, or is that when he realized, hey, I can get a quick cash out, just like Wade, right? Like, what was it that really happened there when you saw Wade on TV? So anyway, so now these two guys are suing the estate. That's still going through the courts. And then they participated in this crazy documentary in 2019, where again, there's no evidence. They had a couple letters that Michael gave them when they were kids, but there's tons of kids that have the same letters from Michael, right? So that wasn't unique to them. And so basically, they gave these crazy graphic details of molestation and abuse. And that's really all they had, is kind of that, try to jar that kind of jarring talk to try to get people, and, the dark music and whatever lighting and whatever. But
It
if you
builds
actually,
suspense, they say. It builds suspense.
yeah, if you actually look at their allegations, they fall apart. Like the easiest one is the whole train station thing, which I think I brought up
Yeah,
last time.
I heard that one.
Yeah, where wait or sorry, James Safechuck claimed he was abused every day in the late 1980s in the train station at Neverland, but the train station didn't exist till 1994. So like obviously he wasn't abused in the late 80s in a building that didn't exist. And there's a lot of other just a lot of other inconsistencies in their claims, like James Safechuck claimed that Michael begged him to testify in 2005. That's not even true. Michael didn't even put on a character defense in 2005. The only reason Wade testified in 2005 is because of tabloid, people who had sold their stories to the tabloids claimed that they saw Wade molested, and Wade was there to dispute that testimony. There was no reason for him for Safecheck to testify. And, and he claimed, like, for example, that he was molested at the first time he was molested was on
I know we mentioned not saying molestation on YouTube, but at this point, it's fine. Just keep going.
I'm sorry. So he claimed he was not he claimed he was abused for the first time at the Bad tour in like Paris in summer of 1988 because he was a dancer on that show, James Safechuck. And then he said he was abused again later, 6 months later at the Grammys when Michael performed at the Grammys. But Michael didn't perform at the Grammys in 1989. He performed at the Grammys in 1988, 6 months before the first time that Safechuck claims he was molested. So there's just all these issues with their timelines, with buildings, with just I mean, the whole documentary is essentially has been, ripped to shreds over, since it came out.
Well, do you think this stuff has tarnished his reputation? I mean, how much is it, I guess, difficult for people to be able to try and debunk a lot of these claims and myths, compared to just the overall impact of how society thinks of these charges? I mean, it's a big thing, and especially if we talk about like molestation stuff. I mean, that is something that anyone who does come forward, it's very like, it takes a lot for them to come forward, but nobody ever thinks about someone wrongfully doing it because of the fact of they're trying to get money out of a celebrity or they're trying to get fame or attention. We don't think about that because it's such a serious accusation, and our society has never been able to really fully comprehend or talk about the subject in a manner to where if it does get brought up, it's immediately 100%, I'm convinced this is true, exactly what this person says. You don't think about people that could be more nefarious making these claims just to try and get something out of a certain celebrity or figure.
Yeah, no, it definitely hurt his image a lot because a lot of people take accusations at face value. I mean, that's what the whole Me Too movement was about. But you have to understand, like, someone who is falsely accused is a victim as well. You know what I mean? Like their lives change. And I wrote about in my book kind of the psychological impact of false allegations. And it's been compared to like bereavement. Like when you are bereaving someone, you're going through this horrible loss, but you have all this support. When you're dealing with false allegations, you're going through this horrible loss, but you have no support. You're on your own, and like society hates you. So in a lot of ways, it's something that's very, very psychologically difficult to deal with, to be falsely accused and falsely labeled. And so I think we need to realize as a society, when an allegation is made, you have to listen to both sides. I'm not saying you don't assume that the accuser is lying, but you look at the evidence to see, okay, who's telling the truth and who's lying. You cannot assume in any situation of two people that this one person is always telling the truth and this one person is lying. You know what I mean? Like it can be the other way around. It could be that that person's telling the truth and that person's lying. So I don't think we should be respectful to people who make allegations, and we should listen to what they have to say, but that doesn't mean we should believe them. We should listen to both sides, look at the evidence, and then form a conclusion. And our whole justice system is based on innocent until proven guilty. So I think people have lost that. They've lost respect for that notion. And they now just run to, okay, accusation equals guilt. And that just makes it really easy then for powerful people to railroad anyone they want to railroad if they know that society will believe any claim.
Do you know anyone personally who's known Michael Jackson, that has came out like Macaulay Culkin? I'm pretty sure Macaulay Culkin has stated that he's never had anything strange happen with Michael Jackson, that he was a good friend. But there's been a lot of people that have been close and know him personally. There's footage of them. And I know people have all speculated Macaulay Culkin had something happen to him. Well, Macaulay Culkin has denied all of that and has never said anything that Michael Jackson has done anything. Even his parents, I'm pretty sure, have spoken up about it and said Michael Jackson was a good person. So I'm just curious if you came across anybody's statements that Michael Jackson knew personally, that have openly voiced and debunked a lot of these allegations that have been flying around about Michael Jackson, especially after his death. I mean, that's even worse if you're doing it when he's gone because he can't even defend himself.
Yeah, no, I must have listened to like 100 interviews of people who worked with him or worked for him or knew him, and they all think the allegations are absurd. Like none of them take those allegations seriously. And Macaulay Culkin, you have to remember, is the godfather to Michael's children. He still hangs out with Paris. Like he's not going to agree to be the godfather of Michael's children and hang out with his children if he was abused, right? So it's just essentially really everyone who's close to Michael defends him. Anyone who knew him on any kind of real level has essentially always defended him. The people have made accusations have kind of been like hangers on, not people that were really close to him, but people who wanted something and were trying to kind of people who would try to capitalize on his fame. Like Wade is a perfect example who tried to capitalize on him positively and now capitalizing on him negatively. Um, but yeah, there's always going to be people who are going to try to capitalize on you if you're famous and rich, unfortunately.
Well, how much did you learn through doing this about the psychology of this celebrity?
Um, yeah, I can't even fathom what it's like to be that famous. You know what I mean? I don't know like what it must feel like to go and be recognized no matter where you go, and especially with Michael to be surrounded by people. And and he said something like, I have no idea what the real world is like, and I have no idea what people are like, because as soon as they see me, they change. They stop talking about what they're talking about and they start talking about me. So every time I see strangers, the conversation is about me. It's not about the weather. It's not about what's going on. It's not about anything. It's always about me. That's the only conversation that's happening. And he's like, that's a really, really weird and strange world to live in, where every conversation you have is about yourself, except for the few people that you're close to, which obviously then you can have natural conversations with them. But he's like, I've never had a natural conversation with a stranger because they just change. The instant they see me, they change. They're not who they were anymore 5 minutes ago. So I think that is really difficult for someone with that level of fame to kind of cope and be normal and understand what normal society is like. Like I don't know how on earth he would even know what normal was.
When it comes to the overall story of Michael Jackson, his life, and then the allegations and his remembrance of everything that he did create, when it came to music and what he really did for a lot of people to help out, I appreciate you giving me the time to be able to talk about it too and be able to actually decipher what's fact from fiction, especially coming from someone who I just heard the allegations and likes some of his songs, but hearing it from yourself who's done exclusive research into Michael Jackson and also grew up listening to Michael Jackson, it opens up my perspective a little bit. But what do you think the overall moral of the Michael Jackson story is? I mean, if you had to put a message of either what the fame does to someone or what a career and a life and how it can be robbed from you from when you're a kid and you have to experience it later, I mean, what would you say out of everything that you've learned about Michael Jackson?
For me, it's to stay authentic. Like no matter what he went through, he stayed who he was. He stayed a very spiritual person. He stayed as someone who loved children, who loved creativity, who loved creation. He didn't change who he was for society around him. And to me, that's kind of the moral of the story. And even though he went through hell, like literal hell to stay who he still remained authentic. And I think you have to admire that. And I think every person has to be who they are and live life the way that they, see it, as long as they're not harming others, obviously. But, everyone has to be themselves. And he stayed authentic in his music. He stayed authentic as a person, and he took on a lot. Like, the media was slandering him constantly. People were making jokes about him constantly. He took on so much pressure that I don't know how any human being can withstand that level of pressure, but he somehow managed to withstand it and just stay who he was. And so I think that's kind of for me the moral of the story.
And where can people find your links, Monica? Again, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show.
Oh, I'm not on social media, but they can my books are available on Amazon. Both the JFK and the Michael book are both on Amazon, as well as other outlets like Thrift Books and Barnes and Noble.
Okay, and I'll make sure I link all those links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting, and thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.